Hello and welcome to a special edition of DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Bill McQueen. For many years, people with disabilities had a hard time finding ways to travel across the country. It was impossible to use some modes of transportation. Many people even gave up trying. But the situation has started to change. On today's show, we'll see what a disabled traveler might expect. We'll look at the state of accessibility in 4 areas of national transportation: trains, airplanes, ferries, and coach lines. The National Transportation Act states accessible transportation is essential to serve the needs of persons with disabilities. How well are those needs being addressed? Today, Ing Wong takes a look at all 4 of our main national services, and she meets people who are advocating for continuing improvements.
There's always been a mystique to train travel. Most people look forward to the experience of their first trip. They don't really know what to expect. For many years, it was very difficult or almost impossible for people with disabilities to travel by rail. Now things have improved. The number of accessible cars has increased, and attendants like Juanita can come along without being charged.
Hello, how are you today?
Fine. I'm going to Montreal.
Okay, what's your last name, please?
Wong.
Miss Wong?
Yeah.
Is somebody assisting you with the chair today?
Yes, that's been arranged.
Have you spoken with the porter yet?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll call somebody for you right away to get assistance to make sure.
It's important to notify the rail line ahead of time that you're a person with a disability so that they can prepare for your arrival. Railroad staff will assist you to the train. Stair lifts like this one at Union Station in Toronto have been installed at some locations across the country. That's my table. Yeah. Oh, okay. That's cool. Okay.
Now we got to strap.
So I guess I try to get some work done. The 10 o'clock Via train heads off to Montreal on schedule. Representatives of Keroule are waiting to meet us when we arrive. Keroule is a transportation advocacy organization. They've been working to improve access to travel for all people with disabilities.
Have you been on a plane before?
Yeah.
How's it different?
Well, it just seems a lot easier. I mean, with a plane, you're taking apart the wheelchair. And there's a whole boarding procedure that's rather complicated.
So spatially too, though, it's more. You got more space here than you would on a plane.
Yeah, a little bit more, a little more mobility, I would think. You know, at least I get to sit in my own wheelchair, which they just can't. You can't do that in a plane because of the concern with the batteries. Yeah, emergency situation. Peter Zine is an experienced traveler. He frequently flies with his service dog Quasar. Peter says access is usually an issue when he travels by plane with his dog.
Where they didn't understand about the service dog, why I need him on the plane. They couldn't understand that at all. So it took about 3/4 of an hour on the phone, long distance to Air Canada, to figure out why. In a way, you'd like to see a on-flight chair that you can use, not these uncomfortable, clumsy chairs, but somehow be able to use your chair on the flight. I'm always concerned about what happens if I have to go to the washroom. So I don't drink very much, and that's probably my biggest concern.
And yet I don't know how they can resolve the issue of making the bathrooms more accessible. No, thank you. It's certainly more relaxing to ride on a train. It's get to see more of the countryside. Hi, I'm Ming. Nice to meet you. Andre Leclerc is the founder and director of Keroul, a consumer-based organization. Jacques Théberge is their marketing coordinator. He's our English language spokesperson who will act as interpreter. So can you tell me, how did Keroul get started?
Comment Keroul a commencé?
Dans le temps que j'étais
I realized that it wasn't really easy for people with disabilities to travel by themselves. So I've decided in 1979 to start my own association to help people with disabilities in their traveling around the world. So after, when I started Keroul, my main goal was to prove to all the people in the industry that there is a big market opportunity for business to arrange all the environment to help people with disabilities to travel easier.
What's the market for people with disabilities who want to use transportation?
l'école a effectué un étude de marché pour montrer à l'aide
So yes, there is a very important market because when we are talking about people with disabilities, we have also to include senior citizens. So by the middle of the year 2000, going to be like 30% of the population that will be over 65 years old. And on that, you can say that probably 15% of these people will develop a disability. So that's why we are saying and we are thinking and we are now able to prove that this market is growing every day.
What kind of changes have you seen within the transportation industry?
pareil comme job à Canada. Il y avait des
A lot of big companies, especially with major airlines, are more aware and now they know how to answer to our needs and already start training programs, sensitization program to their employees.
One of the customer service representatives is Gulsha Desjardins. She's taken a training program to learn how to assist passengers who have disabilities.
We are sort of forewarned when we see that customer approaching us. People who are in electric wheelchairs, for example, we would know what we're supposed to do and what to ask them, and ask them what their capability is on the aircraft. So it gives us an idea of how we're supposed to assist them. It makes the customer or the passenger feel very comfortable because they feel confident that we know what we are doing.
Nellie Rowland has worked in Pearson International Airport in Toronto for many years. She has seen numerous changes.
When I started here 25 years ago, I would maybe see one disabled person every 6 months. Now I see 20 a day in all certain situations. I find that our attitude is so much better towards disabled people. They are getting to enjoy the world by flying, which they never did before. People who cannot see need our assistance. People who are hearing impaired can't hear the announcements whatsoever, so we also handle them. I think there was probably a couple of great pioneers out there about 15 years ago. I wish I could remember the gentleman's name. He was a paraplegic that was on the news constantly, demanding more accessibility for disabled people. I wish I could remember his name, because he was fabulous.
Henry Inns.
Henry Inns, thank you. That's who it was, yes. Henry Inns. I met him, it must be 15 years ago. And I was so impressed with him. Even at that time, I thought, he's going to make a difference. And he did.
Let's look at airplanes. How accessible are they for people with all sorts of disabilities?
Well, it's very hard to make it, physically accessible because you can't change the size of an aircraft. So we can say that the accessibility for aircraft is more in terms of the help that we get from a flight attendant. So we can say that in airlines, the flight attendants, are more aware of the needs and they know different kind of techniques, how to help a person using a wheelchair to transfer from his or her wheelchair to the seat on board the aircraft.
What about access to trains?
Well, first of all, you know that the trains are not really that much accessible. There's not a lot of room to being comfortable when you are using a wheelchair. The government regulations say that the stations should be accessible for people with disabilities, but the problem is they haven't specified if the main access should be accessible or not. So sometimes in places like here or other places, we have access, but we have to use like the freight elevator to get somewhere. So it's not very good for ourselves, and it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to use exactly the same access as anybody else, the main access, but we can't.
Now, what about ferries?
We don't know a lot about ferries because in Quebec, we don't have that much ferries except in the north of Quebec, and it's not really accessible. I went to BC once, and I saw that the ferries from Vancouver to Victoria was quite accessible.
Meanwhile, access to East Coast ferries has also improved. But with older ferries, occasional elevator breakdowns can cause problems for people with disabilities. Let's take a look at coaches, buses. What kind of accessibility issues are involved there?
Well, this is worst. The situation is very bad, I can say, especially in Quebec again. The bus line's owner doesn't realize, like we said before, the market they are losing without providing service to passengers with disability. So it's a big problem. It's a big problem for interprovincial transportation by bus and also for regional transportation. Like in Quebec province, we don't have any regional transportation that is adapted for people with disabilities, actually.
Transport Canada is currently working on regulations to ensure that interprovincial buses are accessible to people with disabilities. These Canadian-made buses are the only ones of their kind in the world. 13 of these buses are currently in operation across Canada. Transport Canada is encouraging industry to put more of them on the road in the future. In some major cities like Toronto, some privately owned bus lines are providing accessible interprovincial and intercity coaches. Go upstairs and get someone. Hi. Now, I understand that you've got some accessible lines.
That's right.
And I'm just curious to see what kind of facilities you have for people in wheelchairs.
Okay, normally accessible lines, if you provide 24 hours notice, you
Right.
have actual wheelchair coaches,
Right,
which just drive up into the lift you up, and brings you right onto the coach.
right. Many of these buses stop at sites with accessible washrooms.
You know, when you are talking about traveling, it's not only transportation, but it's also hotels. And we need places to stay and places to visit. Because even if you have transport, if there's nothing there, if you can't stay there because there's no accessible hotel or anything, it's a big problem. So people have to work, and all the industries should work together to help. Not just transportations that should do things, but also all the industries in tourism should do things too. People have to work all together.
In some big cities, buses to the airport are accessible. One such bus leaves regularly from the Royal York Hotel in downtown Toronto.
When I started, 25 years ago, because of the steps was absolutely impossible. There was no access whatsoever for anyone who was disabled. Coming in, getting onto the plane, leaving, whereas now everything is on one level. The buses from downtown Pacific Western is one way of using available access. The elevators in the building now going through security, even security is more aware of disabled people traveling, that they will scan you sitting down, and makes people easier for people to travel, to see family, friends.
Now, I understand the government has put money into providing rental cars with hand controls. How much do you know about that?
Well, I can tell you that in the national strategy for integration of persons with disabilities, this program is a program who worked the best. It was the best program in terms of participation. Almost every car rental in airports have now hand control for their cars available. There is more than 600 hand control in Canada available for when you rent a car. So this program was really successful. I think it is successful because it doesn't cost a lot. A lot of people think that to help or to give free access to a person with disabilities, it costs a lot and it's a big trouble. It is not. You can see that with the hand control.
Okay, basically we have to push for brake and pull towards yourself for acceleration.
Hand-controlled cars are quite popular.
Actually, we get them and we try to keep them on a request basis. But in case we have a walk-up or something of that nature at our counter, then we would try and install it. It takes about 15 to 30 minutes installation.
Let's talk about accessible transportation within Montreal in terms of public transit for people with disabilities.
Well, we have a system. First of all, it's minibus, adapted minibus. It doesn't really work well, actually. There's a lot of problems. The situation here for a person with disability, when they want to use the transportation, they have to call at least 48 hours in advance because the regular public transit is not accessible. I mean, there is a lot of discussion with the government since it's in 1985, and just a couple little things that has been done since then. So there's a lot of things to do about the transportation just for Montreal.
Now, I know that a lot of cities are now just getting accessible taxis. How many accessible taxis are there in Montreal?
Actually, none.
None.
None. There's no accessible taxi in Montreal, as far as we know. When I'm talking about accessible, it's not only the taxi that should be accessible that you can get in it. To be accessible, you can be able to use it. And there is one taxi that is physically accessible, we can say, but that is only available on weekend, and if you call like a week in advance. So that has to change. It's gonna have to change, and people will have to realize that, like you and I, we are working, and we are paying taxes for what? Same service as the rest of the people. So if we are paying for services, we should be able to have access to these services. We can say that we are the third world of Canada, but still we are a little bit late in terms of accessibility for people with disabilities. It's a long-term process because here I think we still have to prove that when you invest money to make your place accessible, in fact, you're not spending, but as I said, you're investing in the future. But we are not, in Quebec, the only provinces who needs to do more for passengers or for people with disabilities.
Jacques believes that disabled travelers should take an active role in improving the system.
First of all, when there is something wrong, I mean, when you are using any transportation, bus, train or airlines, And if you see that there's something missing, you should tell the company what's missing. Each people should take that in their hands. I mean, not waiting for the government all the time to tell what they need. We have to say what the needs are.
Transport Canada has published a booklet about accessible transportation services for people with disabilities. It outlines services available region by region across the country. If you'd like a copy or if you'd like further information, you can contact them at 1-800-665-6478. Or if you use a TTY, dial them up at 1-800-823-3832. If you've encountered an undue obstacle to your mobility with any of our federally regulated transport services, you may submit a complaint to the National Transportation Agency. Contact them at area code 819-997-6828 or TTY area code 819-953-9705. You may submit a complaint in Braille, audio cassette, or computer disc. We'd also like to hear your traveling stories at DNET. Our address is coming right up. That's DNET This Week. I'm Bill McQueen. See you again next week. You can write to us at Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. Or you can fax us at area code 416-205-3399. This program is brought to you in part by the Canadian Association of Independent Living Centres, promoting and supporting the development of independent living resource centres across Canada.